Rationality is a label. Are you rational or are you not? And science has developed methods and tools for you to see what is real, objectively real, so that you can make decisions that are in the best interest of your life, your health, your longevity, and for your loved ones.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. If you're new to the podcast, you're in for a treat. Almost 2 years ago, I achieved one of my goals for the podcast, scoring an interview with the articulate and witty director of the Hayden Planetarium, one and only Dr. DeGrasse Tyson. I'm still kind of amazed that he was willing to take the time from his busy schedule and chat with us. For my longtime loyal listeners that I've heard it all before, yes, it's been almost 2 years and the time has flown. Thank you for helping me to meet another podcast goal of mine, 100,000 downloads, which we shot past earlier this month. I hope you're all able to sit back and relax and enjoy this awesome discussion with me. If you do find The Rational View insightful, please share your discovery with your friends and spread the word. Think about becoming a subscriber on Podbean or your own podcast app and join the Rational Revolution. On this episode of The Rational View, we have a special treat. Grammy Award-winning former Harvard wrestler and ballet dancer, popular science educator and astrophysicist, the articulate and witty director of the Hayden Planetarium, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, is joining us today. Selected as one of the 100 most influential persons in the world by Time magazine in 2007, Dr. Tyson was awarded the Stephen Hawking Medal for Science Communication in 2017. Dr. Tyson, welcome to The Rational View.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That was a concise, flattering intro. Oh, I have to correct one thing about it. I was nominated for a Grammy, didn't actually get the Grammy. And you can get a Grammy for narrating one of your own books or any book. You can get a Grammy for that. So it's an audio product. And so, but I was delighted to have been nominated because I got to attend the Grammy Awards. And that year, I live in New York, and that year it happened to be based in New York City. They held the Grammys in New York City that year at Madison Square Garden. So I was delighted to just participate.
It's quite a diverse portfolio of very broad ranging things. I didn't know until I looked you up on Wikipedia that you were also a ballet dancer and a wrestler. So that was interesting.
Yeah. So not that Wikipedia, I'd say the Wikipedia page is maybe 90% accurate. I was a performing member of 3 different dance companies, one of which also did ballet, but it did other genres as well. International Latin ballroom. There was jazz dancing in there, sort of show tune type dancing. So, the broader truth is that I danced in troops, but it's not the Bolshoi. Just to make it clear. these are college groups. Just to be clear.
So I have to ask you about one of these things I found. I found on Wikipedia. It says in the year 2000, you were named the sexiest astrophysicist alive by People magazine. Congratulations.
Yeah. That was also, just want to be clear, I guess, do they still do that each year? They had in September. Yeah. They had the sexiest man alive issue. And that issue on the cover is the sexiest man alive as judged by their panel. But what you might not know is the entire issue is filled with sexiest men alive, but in subcategories. Okay. So Brad Pitt that year was sexiest man alive. Okay.
Oh, okay.
We got that one.
Sure.
Clearly. And then they had all the different categories. And I don't know how competitive my category is when you consider other categories that they had: sexiest action star, sexiest model, sexiest professional athlete, sexiest news anchor.
Sure.
There's a lot of very competitive categories there. And so I don't, so I don't know who I beat out. So it's not something to get big headed about. I can just tell you
guess
that.
I must have missed the call for nominations.
That's right.
So,
plus that was, by the way, 2000, that was 40 pounds ago. Just if you want to reckon time.
yeah, we all,
not only temporally, but also by weight. Right?
We're all fighting the bulge from sitting at home. I see you're promoting your newest book. It's called Welcome to the Universe. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about it?
Yeah. It's got a little backstory, actually. I mean, I have a copy of it here, of course. It's actually a brief Welcome to the Universe, a pocket-sized tour. And I have two co-authors, Michael Strauss and Richard Gott. The three of us, now here's the back. Oh, by the way, this is really it really is brief.
Pocket-sized.
It is a literal pocket-sized tour. It's not just the fantasy of that. And the backstory is the three of us taught a class at Princeton, an introductory astrophysics class at Princeton.
Okay.
They're still at Princeton. I became later director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. So the class, there was an intro astrophysics class that had never been taught, and we were going to teach it. And the truth is, none of us wanted to teach the whole class because we have other stuff we wanted to. It was not appropriate. So we said, why don't we each just teach part of it? And that way, that would free time in our schedule. So we split up the universe, and I taught sort of Earth, Sun, solar system, stars. Michael Strauss taught galaxies, and Rich Gott he's an expert on Einstein relativity. He taught cosmology and time travel. And
cool.
So that course started out with 45 people in it. And then in a couple of years, it had 300. And we had to move venues twice just to accommodate that. It became really popular. And so we were flattered by that. And we realized that the way we were teaching it, it had some innovations to it, some sort of fun ways to go in and out of what would otherwise be kind of unfun information. And so we decided to write a book based on that course. And it was textbook sized, but you could read it as though it wasn't a textbook because it was very conversational. It was very, come on in, let's check out the universe. And the title that fit was Welcome to the Universe, right?
Okay.
And that was a big fat book. We even created a problem solving companion book to go with it in case you really wanted to use it as a textbook, even though you could sit down and read it. And then that was popular. And then the publisher, Princeton University Press, said, why don't we make a sort of cherry-picked version of this? And so we said, we can do that. Yeah. So no, it's not just condensed, because if you condense it, that means you're shrinking the full volume. What we did instead was say, no, let's leave that out. No, not that. There's a good one. Let's put that in. So not only was the textbook sort of handpicked for what was really cool in the universe, this is a handpicked version of that textbook. So this is singing with some of the most interesting bits of information and insight and understanding that you could ever put under one cover. So we're all quite proud of it. It just came out.
Okay, so this is very approachable for the general public, kind of a low-level introduction.
Yeah. In fact, the original textbook had math in it, and this one, all that math has been removed, of course.
Okay.
You can't have anything brief that has math in it. It doesn't work. Yeah, the book has to match. It has to match the title of it. Stephen Hawking, when he wrote the very a big seller, A Brief History of Time, was warned by his publisher that, because we knew who he was professionally, but the public really didn't know about him at the time, or that he's in a wheelchair or is paralyzed, has this debilitating condition. And so we knew about him, but not that that's relevant. I just want to say he was not known at the time. So the publisher said, our research shows that for every equation you put in the book, the potential audience is cut in half.
Wow.
So one equation is half, two equations is 1/4, three equations 1/8. You just do the 1/2 to the n power. And so I think there might have been 2 or 3 equations in it, and it was one of the biggest selling books of all time.
Imagine if he hadn't put them in.
There'd be one on every person. Right.
That's cool. So yeah, that's great. I also see that you've started your own podcast, Star Talk. And it looks like you're addressing some important societal issues in this podcast. I looked at a couple episodes. If you want to give a quick shout out to my listeners, maybe we can give you guys a big boost.
Okay, no, I'd be delighted. Actually, it started out as a radio show, a terrestrial radio show, terrestrial meaning radio stations. And that was about 12, 13 years ago. And it was birthed, again, this is kind of backstory. I don't know if anybody cares, but it was birthed with a grant from the National Science Foundation.
Nice.
We told the National Science Foundation, look, most science on the radio is like from public stations, where every 3 months they have to beg you for money. And I said, I think we can make science way more interesting than that on a level where sponsors would want to buy ad time. So to turn it into a commercial entity like anything else is, all right? Like sitcoms, like anything, all right? They have some magic fact about them that allows them to be self-sustained in the marketplace. And I thought, science, I know people like science on a level higher than I think what is previously recognized. And so they said, we'll go with you. And so they gave us a 3-year grant because you have to be able to make the show, even though no one's paying for it. All right. And then people see the show, they say, hey, let's get into that. So we got a 3-year grant, but it took 5 years to operate in the black. And with a bridge grant from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, because we told them about it too, and they were excited. So after 5 years, it became self-sustaining. It's been self-sustaining ever since. And what we do is, the secret sauce, if you will, is we combine the science with humor and pop culture. So this is kind of a woven tapestry. So my co-host,
I'm taking notes here.
Okay. My co-host is always a professional stand-up comedian. And now, not the kind that just only tells one-liners. That's one kind of comedian. Another kind of comedian is very observant and will find something humorous in what you say. Mm-hmm. So they become a force of levity in the program. The science is a force of gravity, and the pop culture is the people's access point to the program. And so, for example, we might have one of our guests might be a celebrity or an actor who starred in a sci-fi movie, right? And that sci-fi movie involves space travel, and we'll use the celebrity, that's the pop culture side, as an excuse to get their fan base to come listen to them, because fan bases follow their people around, and they then get to learn about the actual science of what the actor was in. So the actor, you come for the celebrity and then you stay for the science. That's the sort of classic combo that we invoke. And if the celebrity happens to be about something where I don't carry that expertise, we'll bring in another academic expert. And so we always have an academic perspective on whatever is the pop culture dimension about which you are smiling because we have a professional comedian. When you combine all three of those, it becomes quite potent, I think, especially as evidenced by the fan base that the show has accumulated over those years. So it went from there, then it was satellite radio, and now it's a podcast and a YouTube show. And we spent 3 years as a TV show on National Geographic. And so that was fun. it was like a talk show. We had everything but the band. Okay, I thought, maybe we could have a science band, but we were just getting off the ground, and I couldn't picture how we would include the band, because all the good talk show hosts have bands, right? And so, but what happened since then was that Fox bought National Geographic, and Disney bought both Fox and National Geographic, and so all of this product, especially the Cosmos series that I was privileged to host, which had aired on National Geographic and Fox, those you find all those on Disney Plus right now.
Ah, okay. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
So it's good to see on your podcast, you've been actively advocating for COVID-19 vaccines. Way to go. I've learned on this show, it's difficult as a popularizer to take a stand on a polarizing issue. And my goal that I set out for this podcast was to just do that on many issues, to try to discuss the science and evidence and take it where it leads. But I think I didn't really understand the implications of this, as you said, with your equation in books thing. This is similar to equations with books. Every time you take a stand on a polarizing issue, you risk losing half your audience.
Yeah.
What's your experience with that?
So I learned very early, and I learned this primarily not so much through Star Talk, but through my social media platforms, that it is not useful to express an opinion, because in social media, people get angry if your opinion does not agree with theirs. And that's an extraordinary point in the evolution of people's capacity to communicate. Extraordinary in the sense that, really? Do you want everyone in the world to have exactly your opinion on things? Well, that's that. There are, societies like that. They're called dictatorships, and everybody has to think and feel exactly the same way. And there's hardly any plurality of views and conducts and beliefs and all the like. So this can be very. It sounds like it could be unifying, but be careful what you wish for. And so much of what makes the world interesting is because we're all different from one another. And so I've instead carefully not expressed opinions and only offer perspectives that may inform your opinion. Now, because people, with my level of social media following, typically people with that level are opinion or thought leaders, as we call them, or pundits or whatever. And so they're expecting that I'm handing them an opinion. So many cases, I've just simply put out information, and people have interpreted it as an opinion. And so that's intrigued me, because what it means is there are people with a lens through which they interpret the world, and everything is tribal when seen through that lens. Yes. There's a missing capacity to see information, factual information that conflicts with your belief system about the world. And I'll just give a quick example that happened just a few weeks ago. I had all of these tweets since March 6th, 2020. I must have posted maybe 20 tweets, 30 tweets about COVID, all informational. And I said, wow, we still have a fourth of the country the United States, not getting vaccinated. All right, let me try one more tactic. So I looked at how many people were dying every day. At the time, it was 1,000. Right now, it's even higher than that. Dying every day unvaccinated people dying every day from COVID. Okay. It was rising through 1,000. And 98% of anyone in the hospital sick from COVID or dying from COVID were unvaccinated. So all these numbers conspire here. And so I said, then I checked at the demographic, where the demographics fall on this. And out I said, so about 1,000 people are dying every day from COVID, which means every 10 days, more than 8,000 unvaccinated Republican voters are dying, which is 5 times the rate of Democrats. So I thought to myself, the Republicans would get together and say, we need voters. Okay, we don't want to kill off all our voters because we want to win Congress in the next midterm election. All right, because that adds up, and particularly in districts and regions and counties, this can make a difference. So I thought that's how it would be received. As an educator, I put a lot of thought into what the receptors are to the information, might be in the mind to the information that I'm putting out there. But that's not, fights broke out. It was like, I follow you for science, not because, now you're getting political. I said, I'm not getting political. These are the data. All right. It's like, and people said, how can I believe what you're saying? I don't believe it. Those numbers must be made up. And there was a denial of this blunt truth that stared them right in the face. Now, of course, the numbers are accurate, and I put way more thought into what I post than typically people put in to how they react. Right? I'm just saying.
Sure. Yeah,
I put way more thought into it. But and people reported that tweet as offensive. And if you report a tweet as offensive to Twitter, Twitter has to then put it in front of a panel to analyze it. And then they come back to you and notify you whether they had to take down the tweet or not. And I got this letter to say, it's been reported, we've evaluated, and no, we've decided it does not contain offensive material. So I'm glad that the truth is not offensive. Of all the things that are on social media, this one has got to be reviewed by you. That's kind of weird to me. So yes, this thing looked like an opinion because it got into the social cultural divide and put information there. But in fact, it was not. And not to talk this whole time, but let me give you one more example.
No, it's good.
After one of the horrific school shootings, I noted, and I just posted it, I said, at Walmart, the world's largest gun seller, you can buy an AR-15 rifle, yet company policy bans the sale of pop music with curse words. That's all I posted. That's all it was. Okay. That does not contain an opinion. It's a contrast of facts for you to just do with what you want. Maybe you didn't know that. You probably didn't know that, right? And people divided over it. Again, there's this interpretive lens that so many people carry. As you know, in our First Amendment, there's the protection of free speech, and the Second Amendment, interpreted by many, is the right to carry guns. And so the audience split. I would say 20% said, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That was my expectation. Then the rest split down the middle between it's a private company. They can choose to not sell bad words and think that would be bad for children. That's their prerogative. And the other half said, Second Amendment protects the gun ownership. And people, they were thinking I was arguing one or the other of those two views. Yet I was arguing neither. So the world artificially divided because this is I'm guessing, this is the urge, which is just what you're talking about in there. So, yeah, if you hold a point of view, what'll happen is you lose the people who don't agree with the point of view, and then you're only speaking to the converted by the end. So I try hard to, here's what I do. I give if-then statements. Maybe you could do this.
Okay.
So another one of my COVID tweets was, for some states to have mask mandates while other states do not is like designating a peeing section of the swimming pool. That's all I'm saying. Okay, that's all it is. It's an if-then statement, okay? Is it an opinion? It's just facts, really, okay? You can't, if you want to contain a virus, you can't have adjacent areas have different rules about it. So, yes, that's a COVID tweet. That's the point. Those two are ways to highlight insights that maybe you don't otherwise carry in your tribalistic views.
Interesting. What you mentioned the fact that Twitter, some shady group in Twitter gets to review all these quotes and decide whether or not they're allowable or not, like the CRTC.
They'll only review it if someone complains about it.
How do you feel about that? Is it effective? Is it hindering free speech? Is it helping the conversation? I'm kind of split about these things.
I don't know. What I do know is, given all the crap that's online, that tweet was going to be reviewed for being offensive. That was a little disturbing to me.
Yeah.
It's facts can be viewed by some people as offensive, and then Twitter reviews them. If that's the case, what? Tell me about the stuff that's actually getting through that isn't fact. That, what?
And who decides?
So I'm a little worried, for the platform in that sense. It's just a little worrisome.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I like the way you choose to provide perspective. I think you can bring in opinion on what you choose to highlight without explicitly bringing in opinion, I think.
Yeah, so I guess in all fairness, the tweets that I post only because there's a view that comes from a place. There is a place where these views come from, and this is what enables the construction of the tweet in the first place. I was early out of the box on COVID, March 6th. Institutions are just at the brink of shutting down and meetings are getting canceled. And I said, COVID is like an invasion, like an alien invasion that attacks only humans. And it doesn't care about your religion, your politics, your ideology, your thing. It is an enemy of the species. And we need to have a coordinated effort to combat it that is based on science and rational thinking, and not based on science and not on magical thinking.
Right. Yeah,
that's
indeed.
So is that an opinion? I mean, I guess it could have said, no, we don't need to fight it. I could have said a lot of different things, but I'm trying to protect the species. And of course, not no one, but many people didn't heed this kind of advice. And of course, I was the least of the people giving that advice. There were health professionals and the CDC and all of this. I just felt responsible because of the size of my following. And I might be the only scientist that many people follow in their social media platforms. So I felt some duty to put that kind of information on it. But at no time do I say, get vaccinated. You should be vaccinated. I've never said that. I just give the consequences of not being vaccinated.
I see. Oh, that's very rational. I approve. When I did this podcast,
you have a rational podcast. That's why you approve.
Trying to, I try to get rationality into what I'm doing. I did an intro to science. I did some episodes on climate change and evolution and vaccines and GMOs, and then I did one on how glyphosate doesn't appear to be a human carcinogen, and maybe Monsanto is not the devil incarnate. And I basically lost half my audience, and it's like, I hear you've provided some information on GMOs. So my advice is maybe don't look too deeply into glyphosate.
Yeah, I narrated a documentary about GMOs, and I didn't create the documentary, but I sort of approved its content and made some suggestions. But it was primarily the work of a documentarian named Scott Kennedy, who is he's got, he's left leaning in his worldview and his outlook, but he noticed that there are certain postures that people on the left take that is not founded in either rational thinking or science. And it serves a a worldview that is not itself entirely based in science. And that's a curious fact because the left commonly criticizes the right for being anti-science, primarily citing, justifiably, the denial of human-caused climate change. And that, of course, poses existential threats. So that's science denial on a very extreme level that has global consequences. A lot of the science denial that existed on the left is affected just the individual. If you choose not to buy GMO, okay. But if you do things that then have global consequences, and by the way, the first anti-vaxxers were people on the left. It only worked its way into then, and their reasons were because they were anti-pharma and anti sort of some mainstream science related to it. And then the right became anti-vax out of freedom, and this is America, and so there they meet on the other side of the fence, and now they account for nearly a fourth of all of the country that's not vaccinated. So anyhow, so the GMO. There's an interesting fact about glyphosate. If you look at, about LD50, it's a ranking of lethality of a substance that you might ingest, and you can create this scale for practically anything that's ingestible. It wouldn't even have to be food.
Lowest dose to kill half of a test subpopulation.
Correct. So it's a lowest dose per kilogram of body weight, where if you, no, not lowest dose, lethal dose. So so the way that works is they do this with mice, of course, which have sufficiently similar DNA to humans, although humans don't want to admit that, that there's so much correspondence to what happens to them relative to us. They get cancer, they get obesity, they get addicted. There's a lot of similar things. So they do this on mice, and you give them an ever increasing dose until you see that half of them die. And so that's an LD50. So the lethal dose for glyphosate is higher than the lethal dose for salt.
Yes.
So in other words, a higher lethal dose means it's less lethal to you. You can take more of it before you die, right? And so when I communicate with the public, I just try to put this kind of information out there and then let them decide on their own. And it's hard because people get very, the heels get dug in.
They do.
Because they believe something to be true. And then they cherry pick this. So with a podcast named Rationality, this is the center point to everything you talk about. You believe, you have a worldview, and then you cherry pick information to support that worldview. And then you're content in how you go about life for having done so.
I agree with your observation as well that there's, anti-science on both sides of the political spectrum. This is not a monopoly of the right. There's anti-science just as strongly on the left and, at the extremes, especially where worldview seems to trump facts and evidence.
I would say slightly differently, only just to be precise, because if you tell someone that they are something and they don't believe they're that, then you're not reaching them at all. So no liberal will say, I am anti-science. What is true is for them to hold the beliefs they do, they must reject some or all mainstream science on that subject. They have to reject it. And when I've had this conversation, often the reply was, well, I reject it because pharma is only into big money, and that's why I reject it. So they sort of justify it on the claim that they've done the research, and they're saying that the science that says they're wrong is what's wrong, thereby being able to sustain their view. And in the limit, you get conspiracy theories.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I try to provide evidence-based assessments and show listeners how to apply the tools of skepticism and follow the scientific method. And I think that's important, is to get critical thinking and always question your beliefs, always challenge your assumptions. And I've spent a lot of time on issues surrounding greenhouse gases and anthropogenic climate change, and working to try to help, communicate with, enter the other echo chamber and listen and address people's concerns without caricaturing and calling names. And that's how you have to get across this divide that's immobilizing society on these issues, I think.
To the extent that people tune out because they think you're preaching to them, then the value of what you're doing is you're equipping your audience who are following you and who are listening and learning. You're equipping them with tools for their next Thanksgiving dinner, where where the uncle comes over. There's always, any more than 5 people at a gathering, there's going to be somebody who has views that are very different from the others, that is not based on science or rational thought. I would say also that you can't always use reason to, how does that saying go? You can't use reason to argue someone out of a point that they didn't use reason to get into. It's a nice adage. I don't think it's entirely true, but it's something to keep in mind when you're having such a conversation. And
I think many of our decisions are not rational, and rationality is how we rationalize our emotional attachment to an issue.
Yeah, and I would say, just to stir the pot here, I would say most of what is remarkable and beautiful in the world created by humans did not derive from any kind of rational conduct or behavior. Like the greatest of our art, you're not saying, well, that was done rationally. That's not the state of mind or the emotion. There's nothing rational about Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night, right? That's not what the sky looked like at all to anybody at the time. Okay, with the swirly things but that's surely what the sky felt like to him. And so I think when you discuss rationality, there are many people who thrive in their lives in ways that come nowhere near rationality. And these are very important to them. But it would include religion. It would include, like I said, art. It would include any emotions they feel towards someone or against someone. These are very real to people. So rather than, because rationality is a label. Are you rational or are you not? Whereas I'd rather think of it just tactically, if for no other reason, to think of it as not branded as rationality, but just say, how close to reality do you want to be? And science has developed methods and tools for you to see what is real, objectively real, so that you can make decisions that are in the best interest of your life, your health, your longevity, and for your loved ones.
Yeah.
So that's just, I just put that out there.
Yeah. I mean, we have to obviously separate the realms in which we need rationality. And my goal is to get rationality in public policy, rather than art or religion, which have their own spheres of influence and are very important to the human condition. Public policy is kind of my focus for the rational part. And that's the struggle to separate, the separation of church and state and all of that, obviously is at the root of this. And I think, getting back to climate change, I think some of the extreme weather events that we're seeing now are maybe helping to break society out of immobilization, and maybe we're turning a corner on denialism. I'm not sure. There seems to be a groundswell of recognition of the issue, and maybe we're past the knee on climate change denial, and now we need to turn our attention to solutions.
I think I agree with you, but I think it was hard earned. And it took way longer than it should have, because I tracked it. It started out, no, there is no climate change. And then it became, okay, there is climate change, but humans aren't causing it. And then there's more and more people saying, okay, humans are causing it, but I don't think we can do anything about it, or I don't think we should do anything about it. So that's progress in a sort of perverse sense. And Yeah, it starts. By the way, the military and insurance companies are all in on climate change because climate change around the world destabilizes geopolitics. When you have climate change refugees and the supply chain to support people whose entire villages or cities are knocked out of what by whatever massive weather incident is responsible. So yes, I mean, the more people it hits, and it wasn't just the hurricanes, of course. You have especially the wildfires, the droughts, the floods. Of course, there have always been wildfires and droughts and floods. We're now talking about the frequency of these things. We're talking about the intensity of these things, and you have a once in a century flood happening twice in a decade. So that ought to wake you up to what's going on.
I think maybe it is. Now we have to kind of turn our attention to how are we going to solve this pickle that we're in. How are we doing? How do you think the world's doing on that?
You want me to give it a grade? Do you want me to? I'm reminded. I saw a comic which was really funny. It came out maybe 5 years ago. There's a climate change climate scientist giving a talk, and there's someone in the audience who says, and the climate change scientist is talking about sort of improving the world, reducing the carbon footprint, and it also reduces pollution and other things, and all the ways you can just make a greener world. And someone raises their hand, gets up and says, what if you're wrong? What if what if there is no climate change and we make a better world for nothing?
Yeah,
I thought that was a cute point.
Yeah, no, I'm on side with that. So, I focus a lot on solutions with my listeners and looking at energy systems, especially in decarbonizing the grid and pushing towards, getting rid of fossil fuels, replacing it. On that note, I really enjoyed watching your reboot of Cosmos, Carl Sagan's original grand work, until the episode on future energy systems, where the show failed to mention the one energy source that we know is capable of decarbonizing the economy.
Nuclear.
France did it in a decade, right? That was my only criticism of an amazing series. What was going on there?
So a couple of things. First, the most of what you see let me say that differently. The secret sauce of all three cosmoses, 1980, 2014, 2020, I had the privilege of hosting the second two of those three. The secret sauce there is Ann Druyan, who is the widow of Carl Sagan. And I think she was mostly in his shadow when he was sort of at his prime. They had a couple of books published together, but people were only thinking of Carl Sagan and without wondering what could be her influence on his writings or his outlooks. It's Ann Druyan that her influence on the scripting, on the scenes, on the storytelling is what allows you to watch Cosmos and never at any point think to yourself, I'm watching a documentary. No, you're not thinking that. I don't think there's a word for what Cosmos is. It's informative. It's entertaining. It's even spiritual in a sort of secular sense. It's uplifting. It has all these factors that you don't normally find in a sort of documentary. Part of it is, we probably could have talked about nukes. I think to do so, we'd have to then talk about, because you can't just say something unless you do it properly. And we'd have to say, contrast the dangers of nukes with the dangers of extracting coal from coal mines, for example. Compare the dead from both of those. And there's no contest, of course. The coal mines win the dead contest. Tens of thousands of coal miners have died. But of course, the the power plant, the nuclear power plant disasters get much bigger headlines, okay?
Yes.
Because people fear nukes. And nukes that is one of the forbidden N words of our time, one of the two N words you're not supposed to use. So rather than introduce it, then talk about the fact that they're safer today than they were in Chernobyl. And they're safe, that it was too much. So we said, let's just leapfrog even that and then go into a distant future where you don't even need nukes, because more sunlight hits Earth's surface than all of civilization uses or will ever use. And so it was an excuse to think very forward about this challenge, rather than retread something that has improved over the decades, but would still have risk. And most recently, of course, is the Fukushima disaster that I don't know. I didn't follow up on the health consequences of the Fukushima power plant.
Yeah, I've looked
disaster,
into it.
but that came about, of course, because of a tsunami after an earthquake in Japan, and Japan is in the Ring of Fire, that entire arc of Earth's surface where you have continental plates moving. We have a lot of action, volcanic and action as well as earthquake action. So, so we just didn't go there. It was easier to not go there. And
on the Fukushima one, I've spoken with senior scientists on the UN panel on ionizing radiation, or effects of atomic radiation, UNSCEAR, I think it's called. Jerry Thomas from the UK, especially, who runs the Chernobyl Tissue Bank and does childhood leukemia and that sort of thing. And I've talked with them, and they've said basically that the amount of radiation that came out of Fukushima is unlikely to harm anyone. So I think the risks of radiation are overblown, as you say. It's kind of like the high profile jet crashes that happen once a decade, that force people to go drive their cars, right?
Right. But there's another side of this which complicates the calculation or the interpreting what's happening. So a coal mine collapse kills just the coal miners. It doesn't kill their families or anyone else in the town. So it's a very local thing. A plane crash can kill people on the ground. Most of the time it doesn't, but it can. And of course you're not in control of that. Whereas in a car, you believe you're in control of all parameters. So that if there's an accident, you think I'm a good driver, I can swerve out of it. In an airplane's going down, there's nothing you can do. You're just sitting there waiting the moments for you to die. With a nuclear power plant exposure, since we're still speak of the contraction of cancer probabilistically, right? There's the number of people who would get cancer without it in a zone. And then all you can do is say, what is the increase in that risk that the nuclear disaster will bring? Is it 15% increase on the already low risk? Well, people hear the 15%, they say, oh my gosh, there's a 15% when it was previously zero. No, it's 15% on this other low risk that you would otherwise get it. So here's what happens. So it spreads out. And as it spreads out, the intensity of the ionizing radiation, or the particles that are responsible for the ionizing radiation, that intensity drops, okay? If it stays sort of two-dimensional, it drops as the square of the distance from the release point. And so, but the area grows as the square of the distance to the release point. So the total number of people exposed goes up as the intensity of the radiation drops. And so what you end up getting is these two effects kind of cancel each other. And so you end up with the same number of people who might want to claim that their cancer was attributable to the leakage. And so that because it spreads out, that you have this weird geometric arithmetic. It's not weird. It's just simple, straightforward geometric arithmetic about and then if you get cancer, how are you going to prove it was a Fukushima cancer and not a cancer you would have otherwise gotten on your own, because there will be people in these concentric rings that will get cancer with or without Fukushima. And that makes it very hard. And it makes it a public policy nightmare to disentangle those two phenomena.
Yeah. This has been the problem, is that people have the perception that they're getting cancer from the radiation, when in actual fact the environmental challenges to your DNA are orders of magnitude beyond anything from the radiation, the background radiation levels that we have every day, right?
Exactly. That's how you'd have to give that information, because, a person who is afflicted by it is not responsive to the statistics that they shouldn't have been, right? So what you do, you can just give the general background radiation flux and say this is 1/100th of that or 1/1000th of that. And to the extent that brings peace of mind, I don't know. Because like I said, as we know, the nuke is a bad word. They even took it out of the
bananas.
Right.
Because bananas have high potassium, which is partially radioactive. And so you can say, okay, you've been exposed to half a banana of radiation. That is not what caused your cancer.
So that'd be a way to do that. That's the way you'd have to speak of this. Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So I know that there's a big...
By the way, just to be clear, it's an isotope of potassium is radioactive. So not just straight out potassium.
Right.
So for any volume of potassium, there'll be some that are radioactive. And that's where we get
the
that.
Naturally occurring potassium is
correct.
Radioactive.
Yeah.
The public policy aspect of this is quite intensely battled these days, in Europe especially. You look at the European EU is putting together a package of a taxonomy, for a green taxonomy to help transition away from fossil fuels, and the fight to have nuclear excluded, being led by the Green parties in Germany, is quite something. And as Germany is trying to shut down all of their nuclear plants, the European Joint Research Committee recently concluded that nuclear is as safe in terms of the potential dangers to society as any other power source we have.
Yeah, it's come a long way. Right.
When it comes to solution discussions, it appears to be mostly ignored. It feels like it's kind of a mass science denial.
Well, so then what has to happen there is we start running out of fossil fuels, and people didn't act on sort of green energy fast enough. So the price of oil goes up because it's becoming more and more scarce, and whatever else we've been doing is not making up for that gap. And then people will, I think, embrace nukes because they don't want to spend half their paycheck to drive their car. Their now electric car, which still has to use coal because the electric companies can't keep up with green fuel. So it's a race, I think. And people have a way of changing heart when the economics demands it of them. Yes. And so that's a possible scenario, unless there's such a pace of building wind farms and hydro and tidal power and all these other ways that people have come up with. If that catches up, it catches up, and then we don't need nukes. I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's the massive scale of the problem as the IPCC is placed it is daunting. I think we need to be expanding in all of our green options. If you look at the IPCC report recently, they said to get to 80% decarbonization, we need to something like double or triple our clean electrical outputs from current standards.
Yeah, what complicates that is, of course, the ocean uptakes CO2, so that as we drop our CO2 levels, let's assume we even succeed at that, the ocean, the way the chemistry works, it has there's a chemical equilibrium for every chemical species that's in the air with what's dissolved in the ocean. And so if you remove the CO2 from the air, CO2 then gets outgassed, if you will, from the ocean, returning it back into the air. So we have to not only remove the CO2 from the air, we have to remove the CO2 from the ocean as it gets returned to the air to make sure that the level of the air can stay low. So that's another sort of challenge in the fully recognized climactic cycling that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, let's stop digging before we worry about that.
And by the way, I would say, let me just throw something out there. Sure. There's no reason in principle to demonize energy consumption, because the sun has unlimited energy. So does the earth, for that matter. Iceland used to burn coal, and now in recent decades, they converted essentially completely to geothermal, because Iceland is sitting on a volcano, basically. So they heat their roads so they don't have to plow it in the winter. Okay. That's when you have extra energy, that's the kind of stuff you get to do with it. And so imagine a future, I don't know how close we are to this or ever, but imagine a future where we have a way to systematically remove the CO2 from the atmosphere. Okay. Just remove it.
Yep. And
CO2 scrubbers. There's some place on Earth where wind runs steady and the air goes through, the CO2 drops out and it gets buried. If you can do that, then we control it's a geoengineering project where you control the CO2. You can tune it to whatever level you want, and it won't matter how much buried fossil fuels you burn. It just simply won't matter.
I think now the state of the art.
This is unthinkable to people. And so the only restriction there is one day we're going to run out of the fossil fuels. Okay. And so, you still want to be ready for that day regardless, even if it had nothing to do with climate change.
Yeah. Yeah. I think right now the state of the art for removing CO2 from the air takes about 90% of the energy that you would have got from burning the fossil fuel at the start. So it's
no. So what you do is you get that energy from the sun. Use sunlight to remove the CO2 from the air. Well, that's how you do that.
It takes energy to get sunlight. Energy from it takes energy to build solar panels, and then that has a carbon.
No, but you only build it once, right? Yes,
you
build it once,
years.
and then you use it for its usable life. Yeah, it's not a continuously draining source of energy for you. Yeah, it takes energy to build an electric car.
I feel like renewable is a false title, because every power source requires investment in the material to harvest, and every harvesting infrastructure has a lifetime. So, renewable, yes, the source is renewable, but effectively the amount of nuclear material in the world is also renewable on that basis, and that you have enough to last for billions of years. So I find that biases the discussion towards kind of yes, it's natural. It's kind of the appeal to nature fallacy that yes, it's natural, but it's not, that doesn't necessarily make it better.
Yeah, so nukes are basically renewable for the reasons you stated. There's an unlimited amount, particularly fusion, nuclear fusion. If we get to fusion reactors, there's an unlimited amount of hydrogen around. So yes, the universe is 90-something% hydrogen. So this is not a challenge here. We're not running out. The point here is whatever it is you're making that consumes environmental materials, and that has to be made with the invocation of energy. In principle, all ultimate sources of energy can be traceable to the sun in that supply chain. And so it just doesn't happen to be that way right now, right? You drive your electric car that was made out of materials that required oil, the burning of oil to create. Mm-hmm. So, okay, but I only burn that oil once for my car. Yes, the car has a life expectancy. And so it's a start. But you are right. The full renewability and the full greenitude, or I need a word there, the full greenness of the action is not realized at the level most people think it is when they're doing it. That's certainly the case. But it's a start, and people have to start somewhere.
And yeah, we need to attack this on all levels, because it's a huge problem and it's big. So moving on, want to get your opinion. Are you excited about the James Webb Space Telescope?
By the way, my opinions, I have opinions on a lot of things, but I don't share them because I don't care if anybody else has them. They're my opinions. So you want my opinion on something, I guess I'll give it to you, but not with the intent of convincing you of anything. Okay, so go ahead.
No. I want to know, are you excited about the James Webb Space Telescope launch coming up finally in December of this year?
Finally, the launch date has been established. I don't know when people will be tending to this posting, but as of this posting, it's just a few weeks away. And I'm delighted. It was many years in the making. And, the cost overruns and things, but it's a unique scientific instrument. It's being heavily tested because you only get one shot at this. Unlike the Hubble, we're not going to get to go back to this and repair an error. So we're all looking very closely. We want to make sure it goes well, and we expect groundbreaking science to come of it, which was the whole point of its design. It's going to see the formation of galaxies in the early universe, as well as dig deep into gas clouds that are nearby and get unprecedented resolution in the formation of planets and star systems in general. So we all very much look forward to it.
Yeah, I was actually part of the team that delivered Canada's biggest space astronomy instrument ever, the Fine Guidance Sensor and NEARS instrument to NASA.
Nice.
We delivered that back in 2012, just when Congress was voting on whether to cancel the whole project.
and let me say something about Canada. It was interesting. Practically every image we ever saw of the space shuttle deploying a satellite, there was the Canada arm.
Yes.
And what's weird was,
very iconic.
No matter its orientation, it always just said Canada arm in full view. It wasn't ever upside down or anything. It was, so I don't know
that was
what
the
y'all did.
Engineering bit.
Was it gimbaled in a way so that it always was a Canada arm? It was his own advertisement every single time. So that was quite impressive.
The JWST project is a huge project. I was first involved in concept studies on what was called the Next Generation Space Telescope back in the late 90s.
NGST,
yeah. It's a 20 years journey for people, entire careers developing instrumentation for this and testing it, and people and the public see billions of dollars spent on space astronomy and say, why aren't you spending this money on solving world hunger? You should be doing this. The money isn't just tossed into space, right? This money does go to salaries of highly qualified people here on the ground that pay taxes.
Yeah.
How do you respond to people who suggest that spending big money on astronomy is wasted?
Well, so when people cite hunger and poverty and other challenges of the world, my raw answer to them, this doesn't gain adherence or anything, but it's true that all the problems they listed were around before anyone ever put anything into space. And so to now have these problems and then want to blame the existence of a space program on those problems that predated the space program, I think is not honest about the run of the history of people's attempts to solve problems. That's my first. Second, you can ask, well, how much is NASA spending on space? If you ask those very same people, they will give you the wrong answer. Mm-hmm. You say, well, here's the federal budget. Here's $1. How much of that dollar goes to NASA? And they'll say, 10%, 20%. And then you that's what their answer will be. I'm telling you right now, that is what their answer will be.
Wow.
If they ever had those thoughts.
I wish.
And then I say, no, it is less than 1/2 of 1 penny on a tax dollar. And if you take a physical paper dollar and then cut off 1/2 of 1% of it, you would not even notice that the dollar changed because it doesn't even get into the ink. It's still on the border of what it is. So to cite space as the reason why you're not otherwise solving these problems is disingenuous. Third, I analogize it to being in a cave. So we're all in a cave 30,000 years ago. And then some group of us say to the elders, and back then the elders would have been like 32 cave elders. So, because everybody's dead by 40.
So old.
Yeah. So we'd say, we want to go outside the cave because we see like mountains and valleys and hills and trees and plants. And so we want to see what's out there. And the cave elders say, no, we have cave problems we have to solve first. Solve the cave problems first before you leave the cave. Well, that's exactly what you sound like to me.
Yes.
Realizing how vast the universe is and how tiny Earth is relative to it. You're going to say, don't explore the universe because we have cave problems on Earth we have to solve first. That is an extreme expression of short-sightedness. And no, I can't tell you in what way our problems will be addressed or solved by discoveries made in space. No, I don't know. That's the whole point of research. Okay. The D part of R&D is, I got something, let's turn it into something practical. But the R part of it is, I don't know. In the 1920s, when very brilliant people were giving their attention to the discovery of quantum physics, might you have said, we can't do that going into the 1930s. We have the Depression. We need you to solve these depression problems. And it was, no, I want to think about the atom. No, we don't have that luxury to do so. And quantum physics is now the foundation of all modern information technology because there is no creation, storage, and retrieval of information without exploiting the tenets of quantum physics. Yeah, that would take several decades, 30, 40, 50 years to fully exploit. But that was a frontier of discovery that no one had any idea how it would ever apply to our civilization. And now we couldn't have civilization without it. So, no, that in that case wasn't space. We didn't know how to get to space yet, but it represented a frontier that any socially conscious person might have questioned in the day because it involved very smart people and a lot of money.
That's a great perspective.
So, no, that takes longer than an elevator pitch to communicate, but it's all true. And I want to believe that people will take it, reflect on it, and come back with a different answer.
Indeed. So looks like we're getting towards the end of our time slot here, and I'm really excited to have had you on The Rational View. Let me tell you, one of the goals I set myself when I started this podcast was to get Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson on the podcast because I love the way you explain things and the interest, how well you express these things to the public. So thank you so much for that.
Well, I'm happy to serve, and it's often just an aside here. I get requests to be on podcasts all the time, and the urge of many podcasters is to try to give me the list of famous people who've been on their podcast. And what they don't know is that I really don't give a shit. I don't care who else you've had on. Is your heart in the right place? Is your mission statement and you're trying to make a better world? Then I'm there for you. So now there are a lot of podcasts in the world. I think it's passing 1 million right now, regularly produced podcasts. So now I don't have time to be on all of them. But if there's one called The Rational View, I'm all in. Right.
Awesome. That is great. I really appreciate that. So now that you're here, I need to set another goal. Do you have any suggestions for who I should be looking for next?
I think you should cross the lane more. Okay. You should find a sort of a hip pastor and have a conversation with someone who is religious but still embraces science, and find out what makes them tick and why is it that they embrace science but other pastors don't. Try to reach into places, because that's a big swath of what society is. Then you get to broaden that dialogue and broaden your audience and find out what makes people tick. And there's some very high profile people in that lane, but it wouldn't matter. You want people who have views that are at least well thought out. I don't have an exact list for you, but I'll just give an example. The head of the National Institutes of Health in the United States, Francis Collins, is a PhD biologist, biochemist, and he's a devout Christian. And so Christians like claiming him. See, you can do great science and still believe in Jesus. But what they're missing is the fact that he is not denying evolution, right? He's not denying that we have common ancestry with apes. He's not denying the 5 billion year age of the earth, right? So you can look at where he sits here, and he's more, quote, one of us than he is one of the fundamentalist religious group. And so it's interesting to just see how people land on this spectrum rather than only ever giving a point of view from the edge. And that, I think, will assist in all conversations with aunts and uncles at Thanksgiving. It'll give you some insights into where everybody's coming from, so that if you're trying to bring them to a new place, you take them to a new place, then you'll have greater insights into how they think for having done so.
Excellent. I'll have to do that. So thank you so much for being on The Rational View. It's been great.
All right. Happy to serve, as I said.
Bye-bye.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.